Welcome to this highly unconventional episode of Heydorn and Watson, episode number 16. And today we're going to be talking about social credit and migration, that is to say, social credit and emigration policy. But before we get into that, Michael, this is a little unusual because you're sitting next to me.
Yes, that's right.
Would you like to tell the audience why and
Wow.
how?
Can give you an explanation for that. Well, we both just happen to be in the same place at the same time on the same side of the world, in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not every day that you get to see watch the Heydorn and Watson series happening on just in one place at one time.
Right.
So,
and with both of us side by side,
that's right.
Separated by 15,000 kilometers. Yes. So we had gone to a conference in New York City.
That's right.
Yeah. Basic income conference, and that sort of was the primary occasion.
Primary reason for me traveling to North America.
That's right.
Was to take part in that conference to speak on Douglas social credit, as did Oliver and three other of our colleagues in the cause.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So so we'll go ahead and start to talk a little bit about what social credit theory has to say about migrations, mass migrations in particular. And this is a very deep and complex and can also be a controversial subject. So we're just going to deal with it mainly in general, broad terms. And I suppose we could start by saying that from a Douglas social credit point of view, the main reason we have the sort of migrations we have in the modern world, particularly from developing nations to developed nations, quote unquote, it has to do with the financial system. It has to do with finance, right? So on the Douglas social credit analysis, there isn't enough income being automatically distributed to offset the prices of whatever goods and services we produce. And the economy is always looking for ways to fill that gap, to provide supplemental purchasing power to consumers. And one way it does that, of course, is by engaging in constant growth, cancerous growth, because in order to maintain equilibrium by means of growth, the growth has to occur at an exponentially increasing rate. So developed countries, which have become developed largely because of their ability to fill this gap, they're always looking for reasons for further expanding public and private production and importing large numbers of people into your country, regardless of where they're from, regardless of language, religion, race, etc. That's one way of ensuring that there'll be a need for more schools and hospitals and more roads, and businesses will have more customers, more clients, more goods and services that need to be produced. So we know here in Canada, for example, believe it was a year or two ago, the immigration minister, might have been the one before this one. I'll see if I can find any reference to it on the net. But one of the federal ministers in the government was saying that we need to bring in about 450,000 people every year in order just to maintain our standard of living. And that is really inexplicable except on a social credit basis, except in terms of the Douglas social credit analysis. And of course, at the same time, countries that are economically disadvantaged or having difficulty functioning, filling their gaps, emigration also serves their interests because they are able to, if you will, get rid of some of their excess population for which perhaps they're unable to provide a livelihood. So it's a for the most part a unidirectional movement from poorer countries to richer countries, and it's not because people have an overwhelming desire, to uproot themselves from their families, from their cultures, from their ancestral homelands, to travel thousands of kilometers, perhaps even intercontinentally, to join some other society. It's financial pressure that moves them to do so, and it's financial pressure which motivates the recipient countries to open their doors. So,
yeah, well, that's exactly right, Oliver. And mass migration has devastating social, political, and even cultural effects upon not just, say, the native populations of a given country, but also the incoming migrants. The migrants themselves are, whether for economic or reasons of political or conflict or dysfunction or what have you, they are forced or enticed to leave their homelands and their own native cultures and their extended family structures, in order to migrate to a foreign country where they have no connections they're moving into a foreign culture that is alien and even outright is outright their culture and the native culture is outright hostile to each other,
incompatible
with each other, and that causes would cause a lot of trauma, a lot of displacement, and disillusion amongst the migrants, and just as much as you would have among the native populations, who would be similarly displaced socially, culturally, even economically, by the incoming migrants. So really, overall, maybe with some exceptions, it's bad for everyone.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
yeah, there's nothing sort of. It's true, that people have always moved about and so on and so forth, but so much of the migration we see going on today is due to purely artificial reasons of one sort or another. And we maintain that the financial system, financial pressures, artificial financial pressures, are the main factor that's driving the whole process. And if we could restore the financial systems in each country to a state of equilibrium where there was always enough purchasing power domestically to distribute whatever we produce and to meet the costs of whatever we produce without this need for cancerous economic growth, then there's no reason why a country like Canada, for example, could drastically reduce the numbers of people that it lets in every year, because unless they have very special skills that our native population doesn't have or isn't acquiring, we really have, a country like Canada has no reason to let people in, right? It's only under the existing financial system that it's a benefit.
Yes.
Change the financial system would no longer be a benefit.
That's
in
right.
fact, the liability that it is, because there is a tremendous downside to it from various points of view, that would make it clear that without the economic benefit, there'd be no reason to do it, because you'd just be putting yourself in a worse situation. So I've often thought, Toronto is said to be the most multicultural city in the world, and that's if it's not true, it's pretty high up there. And I've often wondered whether, should the economy fail, whether all these people from different racial, linguistic, cultural, religious backgrounds, whether they would, in that situation, actually be able and be willing to work together in order to confront,
that's right,
this unprecedented economic and financial situation if things do sort of fall apart. And all I can say is I hope I'm surprised, pleasantly surprised, but it seems to me, I don't want to be in Toronto when that happens. I don't want to be in the Toronto area when that happens.
No, me neither, for that matter.
No.
Yeah. Well, your point is precise when you say, when a nation or a society loses its social cohesion, its social homogeneity, it places the country or society at great risk of disintegration and failure and social breakdown, because societies and nations require at least a certain degree of solid homogeneity and social cohesion. That's just human.
It's functionality. It's a requirement of functionality.
That's right. Yeah. It's just human nature.
Yeah.
And when there's arbitrarily being let in huge numbers of foreign people with a foreign culture, and I don't mean this in any way a disrespect or disregard for any foreign people or ethnic group or race or what have you, but this is just the reality as it is. When you let large numbers of foreign people with differing cultures, religions, and or ethnic makeup, you inevitably there's going to be a clash, or there's going to be a separation, and distinctions, and there's going to be a conflict of interest, between the native peoples and the people who have migrated in. At least, certainly, that would be the case, at least with the first or second generations of migrants that have lived in the country. So, what happens often is they form parallel communities, and that's just human nature, right? That you can understand that because they have a sense of commonality, solidarity, and familiarity. Which is what humans require. They need homogeneity, but when you have all these different cultures in a given society or country, you end up what's happened is a balkanization of the society.
Because contrary, let's say, to the tenets of liberal ideology, and we're using liberal in the philosophical classical sense rather than the way it's bandied about today, although we might use the word liberal in that sense too in reference to this particular question. Humans are not atomized individuals. We're not designed to function as atomized individuals, and so it's normal that people as human beings belong to various groups. Some of those groups are very organic, like the family. There's nothing sort of, the family predates the state. And if you think of a nation as sort of an extended family, obviously, there are various nations in the world with cultural traditions going back hundreds, if not thousands of years. And it's simply foolishness to think that we can that we don't need that, or that we can disregard it. Just throw it out and socially, artificially engineer some new identity that will suit everyone that's just happens to be living in the same place, but who actually has roots in so many different areas of the world. So yes, to reinforce the point, because in today's politically correct age, it's very difficult to discuss these things with the necessary honesty and fairness. When we personally, we don't have anything against anybody, regardless of who they are. And the principles we're elucidating are just as valid for Western countries as they are, let's say, for Nigeria or Japan or any country in the world.
Any country, right. That's right. We value mutual respect, between the different races and peoples for everyone, and we value mutual respect, which means every people's right to exist and flourish, and to preserve their homogeneity, and that goes for European countries just as much as it goes for Asian countries, African countries, the South American countries, every
Right.
nation and people.
Right. Yeah. So you mentioned the fact that when Western countries do allow large numbers of people from other cultures to come in, it is often the case that you've got these parallel societies that start to form, and that is just human nature, right? Birds of a feather flock together,
That's
and
right.
people from a similar background, cultural backgrounds, have the same language, same religion. It stands to reason that human beings, being what they are, they're going to tend to want to live with people like themselves, whom they are familiar with and they can predict, and they're not going to, at least most of them, are not going to have sort of a natural inclination to cast that off and to just integrate into a wider society. So in Canada, for example, there are large ethnic enclaves in various places. In Brampton, there's a very large East Indian community. In parts of Toronto, there are a lot of Chinese. Vancouver, the same thing. And this, so you've got that problem of people sort of recreating their home countries in the host country. And to my mind, that is problematic. If it's not a problem now, it may become a problem sometime down the road.
Right.
It could become a security threat. Or,
That's right.
I mean, we've had problems with Quebec separatism in this country
Yeah.
for decades. It seems that if we continue to encourage the formation of very distinct ethnic enclaves, large enclaves in various places, it may eventually become a political problem. So it's really a suicidal policy from various points of view. And we also have the fact that in order for a nation to maintain its sovereignty, it's got to have a sense of itself as a nation. Because once that sense of nationhood is destroyed, well, what's the point of sovereignty? If there's no difference between, let's say, Canada and the U.S., why not just dissolve the border and become one? And I think that's one of the things that the powers, when you talk about financial oligarchs, that's one of the things that they're aiming at, is a globalized world, one world government. And one of the natural barriers to that is the fact that you've got different national cultures and national identities. So if you mix the population up in various countries that there's nothing really to distinguish one country from another, then why bother to have a border?
That's it. You see, exactly.
So nationhood, a country, in order to maintain its sovereignty, it needs to have a sense of nationhood, and nationhood requires continuity from the past through the present to the future. Right? And in order to maintain that continuity, the indigenous population, or the forming population of the country, has to be able to reproduce itself over time.
That's right.
And if you allow in too many people, especially people who are from dissimilar ethnic, cultural backgrounds, it's going to be more and more difficult to maintain that continuity. The continuity will eventually become lost. They're saying right now, for example, that I think it's in Germany, that a very large, I can't remember the exact percentage, it might even be a majority. If you look at people growing up in Germany that are younger than 18 or 15, a large percentage, might even be the majority in certain parts of the country, are not ethnically German. So what does that portend? It portends that in 20, 30, 40, 50 years, however long it takes, the Germany that we have known, more or less with some organic continuity over centuries, even millennia, that nation will cease to exist as we have known it, and be replaced by something entirely different. And the United Nations talks about ethnic cleansing, and that's a form of genocide. And basically what we see happening with some of this migration that's gotten out of control is that various nations are threatened with ethnic cleansing, where people will become minorities in the country of
in
their forefathers.
Their forefathers.
And that isn't right.
No, that's not.
You know, so
No.
you know, we want everyone to have a good standard of living, regardless of who they are. But the answer to that is to have social credit everywhere.
That's right. Exactly.
And that would put an end to a lot of this sort of.
Yeah. And there would be no need for mass migration. You know, the migrants from the developing countries, instead of leaving their homelands and their own cultures to a foreign country, they can remain in their countries, and perhaps they can implement Douglas social credit policies in their countries and greatly improve their standards of living.
Right.
And and they can improve their nations and cultivate their own societies.
Which is something that the vast majority of them would prefer.
Absolutely.
In any case. Yeah. I mean, you know, and that again is human nature. A lot of people who emigrate, if economic and political conditions in their home countries were better than, or at least just as good as the countries they migrate to, they would prefer to stay at home.
That's right. Exactly.
You know, amongst their own people, in their own culture, etc. So it's really quite odd, I guess, that the situation we're living in. We're living in a situation where, you know, if things were otherwise, neither the recipient countries nor the migrants themselves would be wanting to engage in this exercise of uprooting and
right.
You know, being replanted elsewhere.
That's right. And it would just alleviate or just resolve so many problems that result from that.
Right.
You know, like racial or religious conflict. And tension and hatred and violence.
Yes.
All those things that are resulting from mass migration would be, for the most part, ameliorated.
Attenuated.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's something that really needs to be looked at. I mean, anyone who is concerned about the migration issue in itself, or, you know, the short-term or long-term consequences, needs to look at this whole question of finance, of financial structures and systems that don't operate for the common good, either domestically or internationally, and look at you know, the Douglas social credit proposals as one way of reforming the system so that it will lead to more stable migratory conditions.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. And this touches on something that's a bit of a pet peeve of mine, but touches on something that I'll mention as well, and that is, unfortunately, a lot of the people, in my estimation, who are involved in you know, sponsoring refugees or show concern for immigrants and things like this, you have to wonder sometimes how many of those people are genuinely interested in the welfare of the refugees, immigrants, etc., and how many of them see it as an opportunity to showcase their virtue. It's a type of virtue signaling.
Yeah.
There was a situation here, I will mention it, in my own parish, where we have an organization in Canada called Development and Peace, which is pretty well a leftist, socialist organization that's associated with the Catholic Church. It has been caught, and LifeSite News has various documents they put out on this. It has been caught funding groups that sponsor abortion or push contraceptives or other things like that, which the Church opposes. And there are Canadian bishops who won't allow them to operate in their diocese. Unfortunately, our bishop here has not yet so acted. But this group, they're involved in a lot of questionable things, and their take on Catholic social doctrine is quite questionable as well. But one of the things that they sponsored recently was called a Solidarity Walk. And it was scheduled, I believe, for the last Sunday in March of this year. So the weather was still a bit cool. And what they wanted people to do, I don't know how many people showed up. I didn't go. That's cool. And I think there was some snow that day, so I'm not sure how many people showed up. But what they wanted people to do was this is the way it was advertised in the bulletin, get a backpack or a knapsack and fill it with one or two items, the most important items you would have in your home, and that you would choose to put in a knapsack if you had to leave your home suddenly without warning. So I can't imagine what sort of things people would be putting in their knapsacks, but that's what they were told to do, and they were to meet at the church and go on a walk from the church to the local convent. I guess it's about 2 kilometers one way or something like that. And they're walking in solidarity. Now, this is, to my mind, is wrong on so many levels that I don't even know where to begin. Because, first of all, if I were a refugee myself, forced to leave my homeland, to look at these, and we live in a well-to-do area here in Ancaster, I would be insulted to look at these well-to-do people who don't know what it's like to be a refugee, many of whom were never even immigrants, pretending, role-playing, and pretending to live the life of a refugee for an afternoon, and supposedly in solidarity with my plight. I think it's pretty. It's
a mockery.
It's autistic. I mean, you have to wonder about the mentality of the people that think these things up.
Yeah.
And again, I think it's really what it is. This may sound harsh, but this is my judgment of it. It seems to me it's just an opportunity for rich people who maybe feel guilty because of how they've acquired some of their wealth to parade about and pat themselves on the back and look how virtuous we are. We're standing in solidarity, with refugees. But the more fundamental thing that irks me is that whether it's development and peace or the people that go on this sort of walk, they don't ask themselves, why do we have these refugees in the first place?
Exactly.
They never look at causes. They only obsess about, patching up symptoms in ways that makes them, enhances their social position and standing. As if the refugees exist as a means for them to, feel good about themselves or go on some committee and parade and grandstand. The West has been active, directly and indirectly, in destabilizing so many Middle Eastern countries and other countries around the world. But you look at Libya, you look at Syria, the West, through intelligence agencies, through other means, has been arming, training, funding a lot of the insurgents that have been, which then morph into ISIS or whatever.
Yeah.
You look at Syria, you look at the rebels there.
In Iraq
as well. So in Libya, of course, was directly attacked by NATO, Western governments. And they got rid of Gaddafi, and now look at what Gaddafi was basically holding things together and preventing, acting as a sort of barrier.
And he maintained a lot of good social policies, economic policies too, that helped his people a lot.
That's right.
That's probably one of the reasons the Western nations got rid of him because he wasn't playing ball with their unjust economic policies.
Yeah. So what I'm suggesting is if people involved in development and peace really care about the refugees, they should be looking at core causes, and instead of having silly solidarity walks, they should be putting pressure on the federal government to make sure that directly or indirectly, or through our quote-unquote allies, we are not causing the problem by adopting policies that weaken, destabilize Middle Eastern countries.
Exactly. Exactly. Another thing that really irks me is that when you got all these so-called these churches or these groups within the church advocating for refugees or from other foreign countries and campaigning to have them granted asylum in the home country, and then you see them carrying on about this all the time, running these campaigns. All the while, you've got thousands of people in in Canada, for example, many thousands of native people here, or people who've lived here for generations, who are living on the street, who are homeless, or if they're not homeless, they're very poor, they're unemployed, they can't pay their property tax, they can't maintain, they can't pay for the cost of living. And so, what are the churches and parishes doing about this? What are the people in the church doing about this?
Or just the local communities.
Just diddly squat.
Yeah, we have a principle that charity begins at home.
That's right.
And so you're supposed to look after those that are closest to you first. But of course, that's not sexy.
Yeah. Well,
and
it's not politically correct.
It's not politically correct, and it's not the sort of thing that that garners attention, that allows people a chance to grandstand and virtue signal.
So it's all very fake, though. The virtue signaling business. Yeah. Very hypocritical too.
It's far bigger news to sort of sponsor a family, maybe a Muslim family from Syria, who are forced to leave their homeland because of problems that we've caused directly or indirectly
by the Western governments.
Yes.
Yeah. And whilst those same Western governments neglect or even impoverish their own people.
Their own people. Yeah.
So that's the reality of this.
Well, yeah, and then, you talked about various local organizations and churches and parishes, but it's also the case too that refugees and immigrants, in various ways, I think it's the same in Australia, they get all sorts of helps and benefits that the native,
of course they do,
the citizens don't.
Yeah.
And that's a bit
that's
inverted.
Yeah.
That's inverted, because a citizen, if you're a citizen, you should have certain rights and privileges that foreigners don't have. Otherwise, why be a citizen?
Well, exactly.
What's the point of being a citizen? It's actually a liability to be a citizen. You have to pay taxes.
That's right.
So
it should be the responsibility of the government to take care of the citizens first. Since it's the citizens are its prime responsibility.
Yes. Well, that's right. So it's like many things in our world, up is down and black is white, and good is evil, and so on and so forth. Everything is twisted and inverted. Yeah. And it's, as I say, money and economic prosperity, such as it is really the only thing I think that in very multicultural places like Toronto is holding the social fabric together, right? Money is the great unifier.
That's right.
Which is what the plutocrats want. They want to make money sort of the determining power, the unifying, the animating and unifying principle of society, so that we all become mammon worshippers.
That's right. Yeah.
And everything is sold. Anything that can be sold is sold, and nothing has, no cultural or religious value has any kind of trump. No pun intended. Has no trumping power over economic concerns and monetary concerns, right?
Yeah.
So money becomes the
anything can be bought at a price.
Anything can be bought, right? Yeah. And you can sell your heritage, you can sell your identity.
Yeah.
If monetary requirements make that sort of the economically lucrative and meritorious thing to do. Yeah, so it's when we don't have finance in its proper place, when we don't have money in its proper place, we can't look after all those non-economic values like spiritual values, moral values, cultural values. All of those things become subordinate to the overwhelming power of money and economic concerns. And that is essentially the basis of the present civilization. It's also the reason why the present civilization is not sustainable from any point of view. It's not economically sustainable, it's not politically sustainable, it's not socially sustainable, it's not culturally or environmentally sustainable. And so the disharmony and the disorder that we see in the very process of mass migration and in its cultural fallout, we're just setting up ourselves for some chaos, really.
That's right.
Which may very well give the powers that be a reason to demand, unprecedented powers to contain the situation they've created. But right. This is this. People really have to sort of go deeper and look beyond the surface and see what's really going on. Because if they just remain at a very superficial surface level, if they have any sort of humanity about them, all they'll ever succeed in being or doing is, serving the role of a useful idiot.
No, that's it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just pawns in the financial oligarch's game.
Yeah. So, as unfortunately, this is the harsh truth. As many of these immigrants and refugees are, they are pawns.
That's right.
Yeah. And many of the people that are ostensibly helping them or pretending to help them, they are also pawns.
That's right. And it's benefiting no one.
It's benefiting no one.
No.
Yeah. So yet another reason to research and to promote and to discuss Douglas social credit, because Douglas, by putting his finger on the financial problem, is really pointing out the solution to so many of our difficulties, our societal problems.
Right.
And until finance is put right, even those groups that are resisting some of this, until they throw a light on finance and the role of finance in generating all of these phenomena, they're just going to be fighting windmills or rearranging deck chairs in the Titanic. It's it's not going to go anywhere.
No, that's right.
So. The easiest way to solve the problem is fix money. Fix money not only here domestically, but in other countries.
Mm-hmm. That's
right.
And
release humanity from these artificial financial pressures, stresses, and chains, and allow things to develop in a more organic fashion. There's nothing organic about what's going on in the world today. It's all induced by artificial pressures that there's nothing. Those pressures shouldn't be there.
That's right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's right.
All right. So anything else you wanted to say in conclusion, or anything you wanted to add?
No, I think we pretty well covered all the bases.
All right. Yeah. Well, we'll sign off there. So next time we talk, we won't be side by side again.
No,
we'll be back in Brisbane.
Back 15,000 kilometers on the other side of the world. Back in Brisbane, as you say.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right.
So.
Well, we'll leave it there, and I'll attach an article that I wrote on social credit and mass migration. Put that in the description. And if you have any comments or questions, please add them in the comments section. We'll try to get back to you on that as soon as possible. And please join us next week, well, maybe 2 weeks, for the next edition of Heydorn and Watson. Thank you for watching.
Yes, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.